Hey everyone, it's Smartypantschess here, and today we're going to look at a game between Stockfish and Leelenstein, played again in the CCC11 semi-finals. Stockfish is playing white, Leelenstein is playing black. So the book moves are e4, c6, d4, d5, e5, bishop f5. This is the Caro Kann advanced variation, and black gets a nice game. So Stockfish plays knight to f3, black played e6, and now white played bishop to e2, and black played c5. So this is like a French variation, but the bishop is now outside of the pawn chain. So the bishop is on f5, has some very nice scope. Usually the bishop would be trapped on c8, blocked by this e6 pawn. But in this position, black's doing very well because the bishop is outside the pawn chain, and now is clashing in the centre against white's d4 pawn. Stockfish plays a classic move, plays bishop to e3, this is standard, so supports the d pawn and also threatens to take on c5, and Leelenstein plays queen to b6, hitting this pawn on b2. But hitting the pawn on b2 isn't actually that dangerous for white, so Stockfish plays knight to c3. The point is, if now black takes on b2, white can play moves like knight to b5, supporting the rook on a1 and threatens to play knight c7 check and win the exchange. Typically the game would continue, maybe bishop takes c2, queen c1, takes, bishop g6, and now actually white should play d takes c5. This is actually stronger because now white's threatening to play knight d6 with a great game, rather than try and win the exchange in the corner of the board. If we just go back quickly, if black plays knight to a6 in this position, white can also gain an advantage with again d takes c5, bishop takes c2, queen c1, takes, bishop f5, and now white can play the move knight to d6 with check. If bishop takes, then white can take with the c pawn, and suddenly white's actually a pawn down, but has a passed pawn on d6, threatens to play bishop b5 check though, and also maybe even threatens to take the knight on a6 and double those a pawns. So this will be a very nice position for white to be in. So going back to the game, black didn't take on b2 for these reasons and played the move c4 instead, closing down the centre and the bishop on e2. So white protects the pawn on b2, black plays bishop b4, maybe threatening to take the knight on c3 and double the pawns, and white plays a classic move knight h4, hitting the bishop on f5 before black can play a move like h6. So the bishop's got no squares to go to apart from g6, and white will take that bishop at their leisure. So Stockfish castled, Leelenstein played knight c6, and white attacks the queen on b6 with knight to a4, and the queen moves to a5. And so white actually decided to take the bishop first with the knight takes g6, h takes g6. So black now does have an open file for their rook, but now white plays a typical move in these type of positions, c3, so attacks the bishop on b4 and defends their knight on a4. The bishop drops back, so again I've put a nice little arrow in this position, so the rook is actually opened up, but I don't really think it does much for black's position. I think white's super solid here. White's got some tremendous dark squared pawns in the centre, limiting the bishop on f8, and I think white's got a slight edge in this position. So to carry on the edge, Stockfish played the move b3, hitting c4 with the bishop and pawn. So black is pretty much forced to play b5, attacking the knights on a4. And here Stockfish actually took the pawn on c4 with the b pawn. So why can't black capture this knight with b takes a4? Well, white should play the move rook to b5. The point is the queen is forced to move away, and then white will capture on d5, takes on d5, and now queen to a4. So white's gained 2 pawns for the knight, and after knight e7, rook fb1, we see that actually white's got a very nice position. They've got the 2 bishops, and even though black is a knight up, the pieces in the side of the board, the rook on h8, the bishop on f8, and maybe even the rook on a8, are not doing much at the very moment. So if play continued rook c8, white can continue with rook c5. And this knight on c6 is now pinned, and bishop b5 is coming very soon. For instance, play could continue queen d7, bishop b5, rook b8, and now c4. And white has a very good game. They're threatening to play c takes d5, or even d5 if black takes on c4. And we'll mop up this knight on c6 with ease. So for this reason, after b takes c4, looks like Leelenstein saw all this and took the pawn back with b takes c4. So the centre is relatively stable at the moment, and even though knight on a4 looks really awkward, it actually does a great job of defending the c3 pawn against black's queen. White plays queen c2, black played bishop to a3, and Stockfish played g3, knight ge7, and bishop to g4. I'm not too certain what this bishop move does, but I think it's trying to stop black from playing knight to f5, which makes more sense. Black played rook to b8. Stockfish played the move h4, getting some space on the other side of the board. King d7 was played, and Stockfish decided to trade. Rook takes b8, rook takes b8, and Stockfish also played bishop to c1. And now this forces the trade of bishops, so bishop takes c1, rook takes c1, and Leelenstein played rook to b5. So there's really no way for black to infiltrate on this open b file. Rook b5 also stops the knight jumping into c5, because no doubt black will capture twice and swap their exchange for this knight. It's a closed position, so the knights do quite a good job in these type of endgames. But Stockfish plays patiently, plays king g2, knight c8 is played, and play rook h1. So now Stockfish has a plan of trying to play h5 and attack these weak pawns on this side of the board. So Stockfish has just completely switched their attack. So Leelenstein played knight to b6, attacking the knight on a4. So white's got to make a decision now. They can take and swap pieces, or they could play knight c5. I think Stockfish made the right decision in the game. They took the knight in the actual game. Knight c5 was also possible with check, but I think black would take. After takes, queen takes, f4 is forced. Black may be able to play moves like d4. After queen f2, knight d5, takes, queen a3 and bishop f3. It looks as though, again, white is winning this game, but it seems slightly harder to win. The knights in the centre do quite a good job, and black now has a passed c pawn, so this is something white has to defend against, and it's unnecessary. To win the game, Stockfish just simplified and took on b6 with the knight, check. The rook captured, and Stockfish got on with their attack, h5. So threatening to play h takes g. So for this reason, this forces black to take, and white also takes with the rook. So white's plan is very simple. We're just going to play rook h7 and start attacking along the 7th rank. This is what you should do in your own endgames. It's always better to attack rather than defend. So black is now forced on the back foot. Black played rook b8, and after Stockfish plays rook h7, they play rook g8 to defend the pawn. But now Stockfish plays queen b2, so now they've gained the open file temporarily anyway. So threatening to play queen b7 check and dominate black on both sides of the board. Black played rook b8, so again gaining control of the b file, but also now white is attacking this g pawn. So once queen a1 is played, black is forced to go back and defend the pawn once again. And Stockfish piles in now with their last piece, bishop h5, attacking the pawn on f7. We can't play g6 as black because then rook takes f7 with check. And if king e8 to attack the rook and the bishop at the same time, white should play rook f6. If black takes the bishop, white should play rook takes e6. After king d7, there's rook d6 check, king c7 is forced to keep the knight, and white can play queen b1. The point is that white will infiltrate now on h7, and even though white has just sacrificed their bishop, they still have 2 pawns for the bishop and immense counterplay. But in the game, black decided to defend, so they played knight d8 to defend the pawn, and white gained some space. a4, maybe even threatening to play queen a3 here and dominate the dark squares. Black played king c8, and Stockfish is ever so calm here, plays the move f4. So they're just gearing up towards the endgame and pushing all their pawns and the king into the centre of the board. Makes a lot of sense. So white's king is also relatively safe on g2 here. There's no way for black to infiltrate the position. So black played queen c7, defending the f7 pawn. Stockfish plays a5, getting even more space. So black plays a6 to stop this. And white played bishop to e2 now. So going backwards, possibly threatening to play queen h1, or even just retreating the rook back into a better position. Black played king b7, and now white plays a really good move, f5. And the point of this move is that if black takes, white will play bishop f3. And that's a devastating move. It hits the d5 pawn. And it's only a matter of time before white starts ganging up on black's weaknesses. For instance, queen b1 is a big threat with check, and also hitting this f5 pawn. So black will be in a lot of trouble. So after f5, it makes sense that black doesn't take this pawn because it weakens their structure too much. They play king a7 instead. But now Stockfish plays bishop f3, and again this stops black from taking on f5. Knight b7 was played by black, so attacking this a5 pawn twice. But this doesn't worry Stockfish. He played queen a4. So why wasn't white worried about this? Well, if queen a5, queen takes a5, knight takes a5, white can play bishop h5. And this rook on the 7th rank is incredibly strong. They can't play g6 or f6, so they've got to play e takes f5. And after bishop takes f7, black can play rook d8, but then after e6, knight c6, rook takes g7. This is a very nice position for white. All white's got to do is play the move e7 and try and convert to a queen. If king to b8, there's bishop h5, and now the e7 square is supported. If rook d6, e7, knight is forced to take, the rook takes, and even though black does have a passed a pawn, white should be in time with rook e2, a4, rook a2, rook a6. And basically white's just going to hoover up the rest of the pawns and should win the game with ease from here. So that's what happens if queen takes a5. So in the game, knight d8 was played. So black's just defending now, trying to defend their position. White played queen to a3. Just controlling a lot of squares. It's very nice play from Stockfish because they're dominating all these nice dart squares, and they've just got a massive space advantage now. So black is under the cosh here. Queen b7 was played by Leelenstein. Stockfish played g4, advancing the pawns. So queen b3 is played by black, trying to trade queens. Stockfish just checks on c5. After king a8, queen d6 was played. So white is now threatening to take on a6 with check. And a series of pawn exchanges occurs now. So black takes on c3 at the bottom of this pawn chain. But after f takes e6, black throws in a check. The king moves up, and white's king is relatively safe. Black takes back on e6, and Stockfish goes in for the jugular now with bishop takes d5. This is a great move. Bishop takes d5, check. The point is if black takes, white will take with check and win the rook on g8, and that's all she wrote in that position. So king a7 is forced, and now white took on e6, the knight takes, the queen takes, and frankly this is game over for black now. So the queen's attacking the rook on g8, Leelenstein throws in a check, the king goes to h4, and again it's really safe. Queen f8 defends the rook and the pawn, but now queen b6 with check, king a8 takes with check, king b8, and takes on c4. So Stockfish has just hoovered up the majority of black's pawns, and this looks like a one endgame for white. Leelenstein throws in a check, but then g5, and again white's king is really safe. Rook f8 is played, and now Stockfish can start harassing black's king with check, king a8, queen d5 check, king b8, and then e6. The point is, with e6, the queen holds on to this g5 square. Even if black plays a move like rook f4, there's just king g3 and white will be fine. So for this reason black played queen c7, Stockfish checked again, king e8, queen a6 check, king b8, and finally Stockfish triangulates to play queen to b6. After king c8 they trade queens, and this is an easy job now for Stockfish. They play a6, rook h8, a very weird move by Leelenstein, but maybe white's position is just too much. So for some reason computers start playing very weird moves when they've suddenly realised they're lost. So rook h8 is played, rook takes is played, g6, a7, king b7 and queen, and after a few more moves Stockfish checkmates black. And this was a very nicely played game by Stockfish with just superb control over the centre and harassing black down the flanks. I'll post a link to the game below. Let me know your thoughts in the comments as well, and I hope you liked my analysis. If you did, please drop me a like and maybe even subscribe to the channel for more chess videos in the future, and hopefully I'll see you next time. See you later.